part. And the important part was that once the flock filter got up to the level where it was spilling over the flock weir, as soon as that happened, performance started to deteriorate. So high up on this graph is good performance. And you can see that it peaks right where the flock filter starts spilling over, and then it goes downhill. And the hypothesis is that at that point, and for the first time, we start dumping some of the beautiful blue flocks that are very porous and that we're working to capture some of the red small particles that the flocculator failed to capture. And so we're wasting some of our wonderful flock filters before they've actually gotten to do their job for us. And I realize that you've not been thinking about drinking water treatment for 20 years or about how to make drinking water treatment work better, but that has been my passion for a long time. And so this gets me really excited because this is like within the last year, we had this insight about what's limiting the performance of the flock filter. And see, before this, we knew that a flock filter was helpful and that performance improved when we had a flock filter in the bottom of our sedimentation tank. And we had this notion that somehow it's capturing the small particles that the flocculator is failing to flocculate, but we didn't know what the mechanism was. And now, because of looking at this graph and a few other things, we had this notion, oh, it's because the flocks are hanging out there and particles are actually going right into the flock and being captured by the particles that are already being held within the flock. So it's truly the flock acting as a filter. And see, what we needed is we needed a hypothesis that explained why there's a finite capacity of a flock. Like, what about a flock wears out and becomes useless? And our previous hypothesis had been that, well, particles are attaching to the outside of the flock. And we couldn't figure out how that would work, because if particles are attaching to the outside, why can't they keep on attaching to the outside? Well, then the hypothesis was, well, maybe they were getting too big, and so there was too much shear on the outside. But there was another thing that was bothering us, and that is at the very bottom of the flock filter over here, there's this jet of water that's squirting out, and the velocity gradient at that jet is actually pretty high, and it's enough to break up the big flocks. So given that we're breaking up the big flocks right there, why isn't there infinite capacity of those big flocks to keep on then growing again and capturing more particles on the outside? So you see what we just learned? We previously thought that small particles were attaching on the outside, and we couldn't figure out how that would possibly make any sense, because then you should have infinite capacity, because when you get too big, you just break in half and you keep on growing. But now we think that's not what's happening. What's happening is you're capturing particles on the inside. And on the inside, once you're full, and there's no more space to put any more. Or as you capture particles on the inside, it's less porous, and so less water is actually sneaking up through that flock, and so that flock becomes useless because there's no water flowing through it anymore. So now we have a new hypothesis about what's limiting performance, and that gives us an opportunity. Because the whole point of doing the research and trying to figure out what's going on inside the flock filter is to see if we can figure out how to make it work better. This one idea that, wait, one problem is that when we're wasting the flocks, we're wasting them over the top of this weir. And if you look at, how did the blue guys get into the flock blanket? Remember that? Who can remember, sorry, the flock filter? How did the blue flocks, where did they come from? How did they get into the flock filter? they were an avalanche of the green ones. So the green ones go up into the plate settlers, they avalanche down, and as they avalanche down, they grow in size, they turn into blue ones, bigger ones. So where are they coming in and where are we wasting from? They're coming in right from the top, and we're wasting right from the top of the flock filter as well. So we are currently selectively removing the good guys. Do you see that? So if we can redesign how we take the flocks out of the flock filter when there's too many, we could perhaps improve that somewhat. That's one step that we'd like to take. And then I'd like to take an even more dramatic step. How else could I increase the concentration of blue guys? And more to the point, how could I take the ones that are wasted, the ones that are full of red dots, how could I take those and somehow turn them back into useful flocks? I've got to turn them like all the way back into at least green ones and maybe even red ones, and then send them through a flocculator again so that I can create more green ones. And that might sound like, what are you doing, Monroe? You're taking particles that had been perfectly removed, you're breaking them up again, and you're putting them back in the influent of the flocculator. But remember what the flocculator does. The flocculator can take a suspension of particles and it creates collisions, and it runs into problems when the space between the particles of the small particles is large. It has no problem at all making lots of collisions when the space between the particles is small. So if we dump a whole lot more dirt back into the flocculator, and it's dirt that already has coagulant on it, and we run that through the flocculator again, it's possible that it won't require the addition of much additional coagulant, and it'll very quickly grow up again into lots of green guys, which can go into the plate settlers, turn into lots of blue guys. And then all of a sudden, I've got a flock filter that has even more good blue guys in it. And so it'll work even better. That's a crazy dream. And if we're right, this could be pretty dramatic. And like, this is physics, right? We don't know yet what's going to happen. Like, it's possible that there's some reason why this won't work. That's why we're going to do the research. But you see why I get excited? Like, it's possible that you could make a flock blanket or a flock filter that would capture, instead of maybe approaching 90% removal, maybe we would get 99% removal. And if you got 99% removal out of a flock filter, I think you could write home to your mother and explain that to her and be pretty proud. Okay, wow, I don't know if I was going to talk that much about this one slide, but I wanted you to see like these connections and why this matters, and how the fact that we for the first time, we have some insight about what the actual physics is, that just opens up all the more doors.